In March 1956, when police officers finally opened the locked basement door at the Haverman farm outside Hazard, Kentucky, they found 6 young women. These women were between 18 and 22 years old. All 6 were in bad shape and needed a doctor right away. All 6 had been reported missing over the past 4 years, and all 6 had the same uncle. Before we get into the story, if cases like this one are important to you, if you think these stories need to be told and remembered, click the like button and subscribe. Tell me where you are and what time you're watching this. I want to know how far this video is going. Now let's continue with the story. The envelope arrived at the Perry County Sheriff's Office on a Tuesday morning in late February 1956. Deputy Margaret Codall saw it right away when she sorted through the morning mail. It was plain brown with no return address and had been mailed from Lexington 3 days earlier. Inside was a single sheet of typing paper. The words were typed neatly by someone who had been very careful with their spacing and margins. Sheriff Raymond Kelch read it twice before calling Codall into his office. The letter was short and very exact. It gave an address on Rural Road 4, about 8 miles northeast of Hazard. It listed 6 names: Ruth Ann Ledford, Barbara Jean Cornett, Sylvia Mae Woolm, Nancy Carroll Duff, Linda Sue Myers, and Patty Louise Kinzer. Their ages were between 18 and 22, according to the writer. All 6 were living in a basement at the address given. All 6 were pregnant. All were being held by a man named Dale Haverman. Kelch knew the Haverman property. Most people in Perry County did. At least they'd heard of it. The farm had belonged to Daniel and Opel Haverman until they died in a house fire in 1948. Their son Dale had inherited the place. He lived there alone as far as anyone knew. He kept to himself, grew a small tobacco crop, and showed up at church on Christmas and Easter. Nothing unusual, nothing that got attention. The letter ended with one sentence that made Codall's hands go cold when she read it over Kelch's shoulder. If you wait much longer, some of these girls won't survive their deliveries. Kelch set the letter down carefully, as if it might catch fire. He'd been sheriff for 11 years. He'd dealt with people making illegal alcohol, coal camp violence, and the occasional Saturday night stabbing outside the bars on Highway 15. This was different. This was the kind of claim that ended careers if handled wrong, the kind that made a man worry about every decision that would follow. Pull any missing persons reports for those names, he told Codall. Go back 5 years if you need to, and check with Breathitt and Knott counties too. By late afternoon, Codall had put together 6 case files on Kelch's desk. 6 girls reported missing between May 1952 and September 1955. 6 families who'd come to the sheriff's office with photographs and descriptions, and the kind of desperate hope that hardens into something else when months pass without answers. 6 investigations that had stopped within weeks of the first reports, with notes like, probable runaway, and declined to pursue further. Margaret Codall had been a deputy for 3 years. She'd learned to keep her opinions careful and her questions measured. But as she read through those files matching the names to dates and circumstances, she couldn't stop thinking about the word the anonymous letter writer had chosen, not kept or hiding, but held. Margaret Codall spread the 6 files across the conference table in order by date. The oldest case belonged to Ruth Ann Ledford, reported missing on August 14, 1952. She'd been 18 years old, last seen walking home from a church social in the Buckhorn community. Her mother told deputies Ruth Ann had seemed troubled that evening and had left early without explanation. The note at the bottom of the first report said, "Girl known to be moody." Mother reports previous incidents of staying out past curfew, likely staying with friends. There had been one follow-up visit to the Ledford home 2 weeks later. No more investigation after that. The file had been marked inactive by October. Barbara Jean Cornett disappeared next in January 1953. She was 19 years old, from a family that lived in a hollow near Sassafras. She told her father she was visiting her grandmother in Hazard. The grandmother never saw her. Barbara Jean's file had only one interview with her older brother, who mentioned she'd been acting secretive and had talked about running away to Louisville or Cincinnati. The case file ended with, subject as history of deception. No evidence of foul play. Codall noticed something in the Cornett file that hadn't stood out during her first reading. Barbara Jean's mother had mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Dale Haverman had driven Barbara Jean to town for a dental appointment 3 weeks before she vanished. He was married to the girl's aunt, she'd explained, family. The third disappearance came in July 1953. Sylvia Mae Woolm, 18, from Viper in Knott County. She'd been visiting relatives in Perry County for the summer. One afternoon, she walked to a neighbor's house to return a borrowed pie dish. She never arrived. The neighbor lived a quarter-mile down the road. The Knott County Sheriff's Office handled the investigation at first, then transferred it to Perry County when it became clear Sylvia had last been seen on their side of the county line. The transfer took 6 weeks. By then the case had gone cold. The file noted, transient nature of victim's residence suggests possible voluntary departure. Nancy Carroll Duff disappeared in March 1954. She was 20, from a family that attended the same Methodist church as the Havermans had before the parents died. Nancy's case file was thinner than the others. A single interview with her stepfather who said Nancy had been rebellious and had threatened to leave home multiple times. The investigating deputy wrote, domestic situation appears unstable. Subject likely exercised option to leave. Linda Sue Myers vanished in November 1954. She was 18 years old. She'd been walking home from school in the late afternoon. 3 witnesses saw her accept a ride from someone driving a dark-colored pickup truck. No one could identify the driver. Linda's mother insisted her daughter would never get into a vehicle with a stranger. The deputy who took the report noted, mother's judgment questionable. Girl's friends report she frequently accepted rides. The case remained open longer than the others, but by February 1955, it too had been marked inactive. The final case belonged to Patty Louise Kinser, 18 years old, missing since September 1955. She'd gone to help a family friend with tobacco stripping at his barn. When she didn't return home by dark, her parents drove to the property. They found the barn empty. No sign of Patty or the family friend. The friend, when found the next day, claimed Patty had never arrived. He'd waited for 2 hours, then left to run errands. Patty's file had something none of the others did, a handwritten note stapled to the inside cover. Check Haverman property. Someone had written in pencil, then circled it. Below that, in different handwriting, confirmed with H not present. No cause for warrant. Codell found Sheriff Kelch in his office just after 500. She placed a county map on his desk with 6 red pins already stuck in at locations matching where each girl was last seen. The pins formed an uneven circle roughly 15 miles across. At the center of that circle, she placed a 7th pin, the Haverman farm. 3 of these families specifically mentioned Dale Haverman in their first statements, she said. He gave one girl a ride to the dentist. He attended church with another family. He was supposed to meet the last girl for tobacco work but claimed she never showed. Kelch studied the map without speaking. Someone wrote a note about checking his property in the Kinser file. Codell continued. Somebody else wrote that they did check and found nothing, but there's no formal report of any search, no written record. Who confirmed it? Kelch asked. Codell had been hoping he wouldn't ask that question, because the answer made everything worse. The initials below the confirmation note were R.K., Raymond Kelch's own initials. Kelch stared at his own initials for a long moment before responding. I remember the Kinser family coming in. The father was convinced Haverman was lying about the girl not showing up. He paused, running his hand across his jaw. I drove out there myself, October of 55. Haverman met me at the door. Let me look around the main house. Showed me the barn, the tobacco shed. Answered every question I asked. Did you check the cellar? Codell asked. The silence that followed told her everything. He said the door had swollen shut after the spring rains, Kelch said finally. Hadn't been able to open it in months. I could see the door was painted over. Looked like it hadn't been touched in years. He looked up at Codell. I had no probable cause for a warrant, no evidence. Just a father's suspicion and a man who seemed genuinely confused about why I was there. Codell pulled the property deed records from her folder. Daniel and Opal Haverman died in April 1948. Fire started in the kitchen around 200 in the morning. Both bodies found in their bedroom. The fire inspector's report said the blaze burned hot enough to collapse part of the second floor. She slid another document across the desk. Dale Haverman inherited the property that June. According to county records, he made big renovations between 1949 and 1951. Rebuilt the second floor, reinforced the foundation, added new wiring throughout. You're thinking he modified the cellar during those renovations, Kelch said. The original house plans from 1912 show a root cellar 8 by 10 feet accessed through a door off the kitchen. Standard for that time. Codell produced a building permit from 1950. This permit is for foundation stabilization and basement waterproofing. The contractor listed is Haverman himself. No inspections were ever done because the work was classified as maintenance, not new construction. Kelch studied the documents with growing worry. Dale Haverman had been 40 years old when his parents died, unmarried, working occasionally at the coal mines near Hazard. After the inheritance, he'd stopped mining work entirely and lived off the farm income and what remained of his parents' modest savings. Neighbors described him as quiet, helpful when asked. Someone who'd bring vegetables from his garden to church suppers and help elderly residents with repairs. I talked to Ethel Begley last week, Codell said. She lives about a mile from the Haverman place. She mentioned Dale helped her fix her well pump last summer. While he was there, she heard crying coming from his truck. When she asked about it, he said he'd brought some barn cats with him, and they didn't like riding in vehicles. Cats, Kelch repeated. She thought it was odd because the crying sounded more human than animal, but she didn't press it. Said Dale had always been kind to her, and she felt foolish for thinking otherwise. Kelch pulled out the county census records. In 1950, Dale Haverman had listed his household as single occupant, no dependents. Same in the 1955 agricultural census. He'd reported modest tobacco production, a few head of cattle, chickens. Nothing that would require a lot of labor or explain frequent trips to town for supplies. Yet bank records, which Codell had obtained that afternoon through careful inquiry, showed Haverman made weekly deposits from farm sales and monthly withdrawals that seemed unusual for someone living alone. The grocery bills alone suggested he was feeding more than himself. In December 1955, he'd purchased over 200 worth of canned goods, dried beans, and flour from the Hazard food market. The store clerk remembered the transaction because Haverman had paid cash and refused help loading the supplies into his truck. There's something else said. She placed a church directory from 1952 on the desk. 4 of the missing girls attended churches that Dale Haverman had connections to through his parents or extended family. He wasn't a regular member anywhere, but he appeared at funerals, weddings, holiday services, always alone, always polite. The kind of man people remember as being present without really remembering him at all. Kelch closed the files. Get me Judge Winters on the phone. We need that warrant by morning. What reason do we give? Codell asked. We have an anonymous letter and a pattern that looks suspicious but proves nothing. We'll give him the truth, Kelch said. 6 families filed reports. 6 girls haven't been seen in years, and I failed to search that cellar when I had the chance. He met Codal's eyes. That ends tomorrow. By 800 that evening, Judge Harold Winters signed a warrant allowing a complete search of the Haverman property, including all structures and underground spaces. The warrant would be carried out at first light. The group of vehicles left the Perry County Sheriff's Office at 60:15 on the morning of March 12, 1956. 4 vehicles, Kelch and Deputy Thomas Brewer, in the lead car, Codal and Deputy Frank Hoskins following, then 2 more deputies bringing up the rear. They'd notified the Kentucky State Police, who sent a sergeant and a trooper. Dr. Samuel Garrett from Hazard Hospital followed in his own vehicle at Kelch's request. Nobody said it out loud, but they all understood why a doctor was necessary. The Haverman farm sat at the end of a gravel road that turned to mud during heavy rains. March had been wet that year, and the vehicles struggled through ruts deep enough to scrape the bottom. The main house came into view just after 700, a white 2-story structure with fresh paint and a front porch that wrapped around the south side. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Dale Haverman opened the door before Kelch could knock. He wore clean work clothes and held a coffee cup in one hand. His expression showed confusion rather than alarm when he saw the number of law enforcement officers on his property. "Sheriff Kelch," he said evenly. "Didn't expect company this morning." Kelch handed him the warrant. Haverman read it slowly, his face showing nothing. When he finished, he set his coffee cup on the porch railing and stepped aside. "You're welcome to look wherever you need to," he said, "though I'm not sure what you're hoping to find." The inside of the house was very well kept. Clean floors, minimal furniture, everything in its place. The kitchen showed signs of recent cooking. More dishes in the drying rack than one person would use for breakfast. Codal noticed immediately, but said nothing. They moved through the first floor carefully: parlor, dining room, pantry. In the pantry, shelves lined with canned goods stretched from floor to ceiling. Enough food to feed a family for months. The cellar door was where the original house plans showed it should be, off the kitchen near the back entrance. Unlike Kelch's description from his previous visit, the door showed no paint buildup, no signs of not being used. The handle was worn smooth from being opened often. "This door looks different than it did last October," Kelch said. Haverman shrugged. "Fixed it over the winter. You were right that it had swollen shut. Took me a few months to get around to planing it down and rehanging it properly." Kelch pulled the door open. Wooden stairs went down into darkness. He found the light switch, a bare bulb lighting up rough stone walls and a dirt floor. The space matched the dimensions from the original house plans, about 8 by 10 feet, filled with the usual cellar items: mason jars of preserves, a few pieces of old furniture, firewood stacked against one wall. Deputy Brewer went down first, shining his flashlight across every surface. "Seems normal, Sheriff." But Codal was studying the walls. The stonework looked older near the stairs, the mortar crumbling in places. Toward the back wall, the stones appeared newer, the mortar fresh and even. She ran her hand along the seam where old met new. "This wall has been rebuilt," she said. Haverman's voice came from the top of the stairs, still calm. Foundation was cracking. Had to reinforce it during the renovations. Kelch went down into the cellar and stood beside Codal. The new stonework went about 4 feet along the back wall and disappeared behind a wooden shelving unit heavy with jarred tomatoes and green beans. He grabbed one end of the shelving unit. It moved easily, too easily for something supposedly holding that much weight. The jars were empty. Behind the shelving, set into the newer stonework, was a door. Not old wood like the cellar entrance above, but newer lumber with a heavy bolt lock on the outside. The temperature in the cellar seemed to drop. Kelch could hear his own breathing, the shuffle of boots on dirt as more deputies crowded down the stairs. Haverman said nothing. Kelch drew the bolt. The metal scraped against the metal bracket, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the small space. He pulled the door open. The smell hit them first: unwashed bodies, human waste, something sickeningly sweet that Kelch couldn't immediately identify. Then the dimensions became clear, a hallway going back into darkness, far beyond where the original foundation should have ended. Electric lights hung from the ceiling at intervals, their cords running along the stone walls. Codal reached for the first light switch. The hallway lit up in sections, revealing 6 doors, 3 on each side, all closed, all with locks on the outside. From behind one of those doors came a sound, quiet at first, then building. A girl's voice, hoarse and uncertain, as if she'd forgotten how to call for help. "Is someone there? Please, is someone finally there?" Kelch moved toward the voice, his hands shaking as he worked the lock. The door opened to reveal a small room, maybe 6 feet by 8, with a single cot, bucket, and a girl sitting on the floor against the far wall. She raised one arm to shield her eyes from the light flooding in from the hallway. Her other hand rested protectively across a swollen belly. "Ruth Ann Lidford." Kelch's voice came out barely above a whisper. The girl nodded slowly, as if uncertain whether speaking would make the moment disappear. She looked far older than her actual age, her face thin, her hair hanging in matted tangles past her shoulders. She wore a cotton dress that had been mended multiple times and was now stretched tight across her pregnant stomach. "How long?" she whispered. "How long has it been?" "March," Kelch said. "You've been missing since August 1952. Ruth Ann closed her eyes. When she opened them again, tears ran down her cheeks. 3 years and 7 months. I kept trying to count, but I lost track after the first year. Dr. Garrett pushed past Kelch into the room, his medical bag already open. Let me examine you, miss. We're going to get you out of here. Behind them, deputies were opening the other doors. From each room came the same series of sounds, the scrape of locks, the creak of hinges, then shocked silence followed by quiet weeping. Codal stood in the hallway writing names in her notebook as each girl was identified. Barbara Jane Cornett, now 22, showing advanced signs of poor health from being held prisoner. Sylvia Mae Woom, 20, in visibly fragile condition. Nancy Carol Duff, 19, her belly barely showing. Linda Shue Myers, 18, visibly weakened and in urgent need of medical care. Patty Louise Kinser, 18, in poor condition and clearly distressed. The only one who screamed when the door opened, pressing herself into the corner until Dr. Garrett spoke to her in soft, measured tones. The rooms were identical. Each had a cot with thin blankets, a bucket for waste, a small table with a basin for washing. No windows, no natural light. The walls were bare stone, the floors concrete. Electrical outlets had been put in each room, but no lamps. Haverman controlled even their access to light. Ruth Ann was the most able to talk of the 6. While Dr. Garrett did quick examinations, she answered Kelch's questions in a voice that sounded like it belonged to someone much older. He came to the church social in Buckhorn, she said. Offered to drive me home because it was getting dark. I knew him from family gatherings. My mother's cousin married his sister years ago. I thought it was safe. She paused, swallowing hard. He didn't take me home. He brought me here instead. Told me I was going to help him start a family, that God had chosen me for this purpose. Did he hurt you? Codal asked carefully. Ruth Ann's laugh was bitter and short. He mistreated all of us, but he was careful not to leave obvious signs. No marks where anyone could see. If anyone ever came looking, which nobody did for a very long time. She explained the routine Haverman had set up. He brought meals twice daily, always at the same times, morning and evening. Canned food mostly, sometimes fresh eggs or milk. He spoke to them about scripture, about their duty, about how they were building something important together. As the months passed, his visits grew less frequent and his behavior became more unpredictable. Ruth Ann had endured repeated periods of severe hardship. The outcomes of her previous confinement-related conditions had been tragic. She was deep into another stage of captivity-related health complications. What happened to the babies? Kelch asked, though he dreaded the answer. He took them upstairs, Ruth Ann said flatly. Said he was taking them to good families, but I heard him digging outside my first night back down here after the second one died. There's a garden patch on the east side of the house. I could hear the shovel hitting rocks. Barbara Jean Cornett spoke from her doorway, her voice steadier than her hands. I had one baby. She survived briefly. He named her Mary and said she was an angel returning to heaven. Then he brought me straight back down here and it started all over again. The youngest, Patty Kinser, wouldn't speak at all. She sat on her cot, staring at her hands, rocking slightly. Dr. Garrett estimated she'd been malnourished for months, possibly longer. Upstairs, State Police Sergeant Morris had Dale Haverman in handcuffs. Haverman sat at his kitchen table, calm and quiet, watching through the window as ambulances arrived. When Kelch came up from the cellar, Haverman looked up. They were safe here, he said. Nobody was looking for them anyway. I gave them purpose. Kelch didn't trust himself to respond. Instead, he walked outside where the morning sun felt wrong against the horror they'd uncovered. 6 girls, 4 years, and a family tree that had given Haverman access to each one. The investigation into Dale Haverman's family connections began that same afternoon while the girls were being taken to Hazard Hospital. Deputy Codal spent hours in the county clerk's office, tracing marriages, births, and deaths through decades of records. What came out was a web of relationships that explained how Haverman had positioned himself within reach of each victim. Ruth Ann Ledford's connection ran through Haverman's deceased sister, Martha, who had married Ruth Ann's mother's first cousin in 1938. The marriage ended in divorce by 1945, but Haverman had kept in contact with that branch of the family, appearing at reunions and holiday gatherings. He'd watched Ruth Ann grow up from a distance, always present but never intrusive. The last family gathering he'd attended before taking her was a 4th of July picnic in 1952. Ruth Ann had been there with her parents. Barbara Jane Cornett's link was more direct. Her mother's sister had married Haverman in 1946, a union that lasted only 8 months before she left him, citing his peculiar ideas about family and religion. The marriage was annulled, but Haverman remained on friendly terms with the Cornett family. He'd helped Barbara Jean's father repair a barn roof in 1952. He'd driven Barbara Jean to her dental appointment 3 weeks before she disappeared, just as her mother had mentioned in the missing persons report. Sylvia Mae Woom had no blood connection to Haverman, but her family attended the same Methodist church his parents had belonged to before their deaths. Haverman appeared at Christmas services and summer tent revivals, sitting quietly in the back pews. Church records showed he'd volunteered to help with the youth group summer camping trip in 1953, the same trip Sylvia attended while visiting her Perry County relatives. She'd gotten separated from the group during a hike. Haverman had been the one who claimed to find her and bring her back to camp. 2 weeks later, she vanished while returning a pie dish. Nancy Carol Duff's family attended a different Methodist church, but her deceased mother had been engaged to Haverman in 1942 before breaking it off to marry Nancy's father instead. Haverman attended the funeral when Nancy's mother died of pneumonia in 1951. Nancy was 18 then. Haverman sent the family a sympathy card every year on the anniversary of her death. Nancy's stepfather had mentioned during the missing persons interview that Haverman had offered to help Nancy find work in Hazard, said he knew people who needed domestic help. The stepfather had declined, but Nancy had told friends she was considering it anyway. Linda Sue Myers represented Haverman's most calculated acquisition. Her family had no connection to him at all until 1954, when Haverman began attending the same small Pentecostal church the Myers family attended in the community of Viper. He'd started coming in September, sitting near the family, offering them rides when their truck broke down. By October, he was a familiar presence. When Linda Sue accepted a ride from someone driving a dark pickup truck in November, 3 witnesses had seen it happen. None recognized the truck as Haverman's because he'd borrowed one from a neighbor that day, claiming his own vehicle needed repairs. Patty Louise Kinser's connection circled back to Haverman's work history. Her father, Raymond Kinser, had worked alongside Haverman in the coal mines in 1947 and 1948. They'd maintained a friendly acquaintance even after Haverman stopped mining. When Haverman needed help with tobacco stripping in September 1955, he'd called Raymond and asked if Patty could assist for a few hours. He had helped their family before, Raymond explained later to investigators. It seemed like a reasonable request. A codal presented her findings to Kelch that evening. The pattern was clear. Haverman had spent years building trust, appearing at the edges of these families' lives, making himself useful and unremarkable. He'd studied each girl, learned their routines, identified moments of vulnerability. Ruth Ann walking home in the dark. Barbara Jean traveling alone to visit her grandmother. Sylvia separated from her camping group. Nancy seeking independence from her stepfather. Linda Sue's family struggling with transportation. Patty's family needing extra labor. He was patient, Codal said. Some of these connections go back a decade or more. He positioned himself as trustworthy long before he ever made a move. What disturbed Kelch most was realizing that Haverman had likely been planning this since at least the mid-1940s, possibly earlier. The annulled marriage to Barbara Jean's aunt, the broken engagement to Nancy's mother, his presence at family and church events where young girls would be present. He'd been watching for years, waiting for the right circumstances. State police investigators found Haverman's journals in a locked trunk in his bedroom. Page after page of observations about girls in various communities, their ages, their family situations, their vulnerabilities. Ruth Ann's name appeared first with entries dating back to 1949, noting early observations years before her disappearance. The final entry, written the morning of the raid, simply read, "The work continues. 7 would be better than 6. Elizabeth Watts arrived in Hazard 3 days after the discovery. She'd been covering courts and crime for the Louisville Courier Journal for 8 years, but nothing had prepared her for the story unfolding in Perry County. While other reporters focused on the shocking elements, Watts went to the sheriff's office and asked for the original missing persons reports. What she found confirmed her worst suspicions. She laid the 6 reports across a conference table and photographed each one, paying particular attention to the notes and follow-up investigations, or rather, the lack of them. Ruth Ann Ledford's report had a single follow-up entry dated 2 weeks after her disappearance. Mother states subject was moody and prone to staying out late. No evidence of abduction. Case inactive pending new information. Or no interviews with friends. No searching the area where she was last seen. No follow-up with Dale Haverman despite him being at the same church social that evening. Barbara Jane Cornett's file was even thinner. The first report mentioned Haverman had driven her to the dentist weeks before she vanished, a detail that should have warranted at least a conversation with him. Instead, the note read, subject as history of deception per family. Probable voluntary departure. The case was marked inactive within 3 weeks. Sylvia May Womb's report sat in jurisdictional limbo for 6 weeks while Perry and Knott counties debated whose responsibility she was. By the time Perry County officially took the case, witnesses couldn't remember specific details and the trail had gone cold. The final note. Transient nature of subject's summer visit suggests return to primary residence without notification. A Nancy Carroll Duff stepfather had filed the report, but the investigating deputy's notes revealed clear bias. Stepfather appears controlling. Subject likely fled domestic situation. Mother deceased. Family situation unstable. No search was done. No interviews with Nancy's friends or church members. The case was closed as a runaway within 10 days. Linda Sue Myers received the most attention, likely because 3 witnesses saw her get into the truck. But those witnesses couldn't identify the vehicle or driver, and the investigation stalled. What caught Watts' attention was a note dated 3 weeks after Linda's disappearance. Anonymous tip suggests checking Dale Haverman. Haverman interviewed, cooperative. No cause for further action. The deputy who'd conducted that interview was Frank Hoskins, one of the men who'd helped with the raid. Watts tracked down Hoskins at a diner in Hazard. He agreed to speak off the record, his coffee cooling between his hands as he talked. I went to Haverman's place in December '54, Hoskins said. Anonymous caller said I should look there for the Myers girl. Haverman seemed genuinely surprised I was asking about her. Said he knew the family from church but hadn't seen Linda in weeks. He let me look around the house, showed me the barn and outbuildings. Everything seemed normal. Hoskins paused. He told me the cellar door was stuck shut. I could see it was painted over. I didn't push it. Why not? Watts asked. Because I had nothing concrete, no evidence, no probable cause. Just an anonymous call and a man who was being cooperative and open. If I'd pushed harder without justification and been wrong, I'd have been harassing an innocent citizen. He met her eyes. I made the wrong call. I'll live with that. The Petty-Kinzer file contained the most damning evidence of system-wide failure. Someone had written "Check Haverman property" in pencil, suggesting genuine suspicion. Sheriff Kelch's initials appeared below it with the note, confirmed with H not present. No cause for warrant. Kelch had visited the property, had seen the painted over cellar door, and had accepted Haverman's explanation without question. When Watts published her findings in a front-page story on March 18th, the reaction was immediate and angry. Families of the victims demanded answers. Community members who trusted Haverman felt betrayed and ashamed, but the harshest criticism focused on law enforcement. The common thread in all 6 cases was clear: investigators had looked for reasons not to investigate rather than reasons to pursue leads. Girls from troubled homes, girls who seemed moody or rebellious, girls whose families didn't fit conventional molds. Each one had been dismissed as a runaway, as someone who'd chosen to leave, as unworthy of continued effort. Ruth Ann Lidford's mother gave Watts an interview from her home in Buckhorn. "I told them my daughter wouldn't just leave," she said, her hands shaking. "I told them she was scared of something, that something wasn't right. They wrote in their report that she was moody, like that explained everything, like that made it acceptable to stop looking." 3 other families echoed similar frustrations. They'd been told their daughters were runaways, troubled teens, girls making bad choices. They'd been advised to wait, to hope the girls would come home on their own. Some deputies had suggested the families bore responsibility for not controlling their daughters better. "They looked at us like we were the problem," Barbara Jane Cornett's father told Watts. "Like we'd failed as parents, so of course our daughter ran away. Nobody wanted to consider that someone had taken her. That would have meant actual work." Dale Haverman's trial began on September 10, 1956, at the Perry County Courthouse in Hazard. The prosecution put together a case built on physical evidence, medical testimony, and the journals found in Haverman's bedroom. Defense attorney Robert Thornton, appointed by the court when Haverman's assets proved insufficient to hire private counsel, argued diminished capacity stemming from childhood trauma and religious delusion. The courtroom filled to capacity each day. Families of the victims occupied the first 2 rows on the left side. They sat separately from one another, divided by shame and grief and the knowledge that they'd each been manipulated by the same man. Ruth Ann's mother wouldn't look at Barbara Jean's father, whose sister had once been married to Haverman. Nancy's stepfather sat alone, his hands clasped between his knees, while other families whispered about his failure to protect his stepdaughter. The prosecution, led by Commonwealth's attorney James Fellner, began with the physical evidence. State police investigators had dug up the garden on the east side of the Haverman house. They'd uncovered indications of past medical tragedies connected to the confinement. Medical examiners testified that 2 appeared to have been stillborn or died shortly after birth. The third showed signs of having lived several days. None had received proper burial or death certificates. Dr. Garrett testified about the conditions of the girls when they were discovered: malnutrition, vitamin deficiencies, infections from poor sanitation. Ruth Ann had signs of past physical strain. Barbara Jean showed signs of repeated trauma. All 6 showed symptoms of prolonged psychological abuse, difficulty making eye contact, hesitation in speech, automatic deference to male authority. The girls themselves provided limited testimony. The judge ruled their statements could be read into the record rather than requiring them to face Haverman directly. Ruth Ann's account, delivered by a court clerk in a steady monotone, described her abduction and the years that followed in the basement. She explained Haverman's religious justifications, his insistence that he was building a righteous family, his conviction that the outside world was corrupt and that he was saving these girls from sin. Barbara Jean's statement focused on the deaths of the babies. She described holding her daughter for 5 days, watching the infant grow weaker without medical care, begging Haverman to take the child to a doctor. He'd refused, saying God would decide the baby's fate. When one of the outcomes turned tragic, Haverman had taken the body and returned later with signs he'd been outside. The defense called a psychiatrist from Lexington who'd examined Haverman over 3 sessions. Dr. Milton Greer testified that Haverman suffered from a delusional disorder centered on religious themes. His parents had been strict fundamentalists who'd isolated him socially and impressed upon him the importance of patriarchal authority and female submission. When they died in the fire, Haverman had interpreted it as punishment for their failure to live according to God's true plan. He decided he would succeed where they'd failed. He genuinely believes he was acting righteously, Dr. Greer told the jury. In his mind, these girls were lost souls he was saving. The pregnancies were part of building a pure family under his guidance. He shows no understanding that his actions caused harm. The Thornton argued that Haverman's ability to tell right from wrong had been damaged by years of psychological conditioning and untreated mental illness. He pointed to the journals as evidence of a diseased mind, not criminal intent. He asked the jury to consider commitment to a psychiatric facility rather than prison. The prosecution's closing argument lasted 40 minutes. Fellner walked the jury through the timeline of calculation and planning the years Haverman spent building trust, the careful selection of vulnerable girls, the construction of the hidden basement rooms, the systematic abductions. He held up photographs of the 3 graves of the locked doors of the rooms where girls had been held for years. This was not delusion, Fellner said. This was deliberate. He knew these girls had families searching for them. He knew they wanted to go home. He knew what he was doing was wrong, which is why he built those rooms in secret, why he lied to investigators, why he hid the evidence of dead babies in his garden. A delusional man doesn't take those precautions. A criminal does. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with guilty verdicts on 6 counts of kidnapping, 6 counts of severe unlawful acts and abuse, and 3 counts of concealing a death. The judge sentenced Haverman to 6 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Haverman showed no emotion when the verdict was read. As deputies led him from the courtroom, he turned to look at the families in the gallery. His expression remained calm, almost confused, as if he still couldn't understand why they were angry. Then he was gone, and the families were left sitting in the same room together for the first time since their daughters had been taken, united only by the enormity of what they'd lost. Between April and August 1956, 5 of the 6 girls gave birth. Ruth Ann delivered a boy in late April at Hazard Hospital, her 3rd pregnancy and her first surviving child. Barbara Jean had a girl in May. Sylvia delivered twins in June, both boys. Nancy gave birth to a girl in July. Linda Sue's son arrived in August, 3 weeks early but healthy. Only Patty Kinzer miscarried in early May, the trauma and poor health having taken their toll. The Commonwealth of Kentucky moved immediately to terminate Haverman's parental rights. The termination was granted by mid-June, and social services began arranging closed adoptions for all 5 infants. The state wanted new birth certificates with no mention of the circumstances. Fresh starts for children who carried the weight of their father's crimes. Ruth Ann refused to surrender her son for 2 weeks. She'd already lost 2 babies, had spent 4 years imagining motherhood. Hospital staff found her each morning beside the infant's bassinet, singing quietly. When the social worker finally convinced her she had no means to support a child, Ruth Ann signed the papers without reading them. She never held him again. Barbara Jean's family wanted to raise the child, but social services denied the request, arguing it would prevent healing. Barbara Jean was 22 when she signed the adoption papers. Her mother attended and wept silently throughout. Sylvia's twins were separated and placed with different families. The adoption agency believed it would be easier to place them individually. Sylvia was 20 and recovering from difficult medical complications. The papers were signed by her parents on her behalf. Nancy, who'd been the quietest of the 6, asked to see her daughter before the adoption was finalized. She held the baby for 3 hours memorizing features. Then she handed the child to the social worker and asked that the adoptive family be told one thing: the baby's mother loved her enough to let her go. Linda Sue's case generated the most controversy. At 18, she was old enough to make certain decisions, but social services petitioned for guardianship based on her circumstances. Linda Sue fought by refusing to name the baby. The birth certificate listed male infant Myers, and the child went into foster care for 3 months before placement. Linda Sue left the hospital the day after delivery and never asked about her son again. The girls themselves scattered in the following months. Ruth Ann returned home but left for Lexington after 6 months, unable to bear the community's whispers. Barbara Jean stayed in Perry County, enrolled in a secretarial program, and found work at a law office. She never discussed the basement. Sylvia returned to Connaught County, finished high school through correspondence, and moved to Cincinnati in 1958. She told people there she was from Ohio, inventing a conventional childhood. Nancy moved to Louisville with church charity assistance. She worked as a waitress, attended night classes, and changed her name legally in 1959. She married in 1962 and never told her husband about the basement or the baby. Linda Sue left Kentucky entirely in late 1956. Social services lost contact with her by 1957. Occasional reports surfaced over the years, sightings in Chicago, in Detroit, working under assumed names, moving frequently. She never reconnected with her family. Patty Kinzer stayed home. At 18, she struggled to move forward, too damaged to imagine escape. She lived with her parents until 1964, then married a man 20 years older who believed he was rescuing her. The marriage lasted 3 years. Dale Haverman died on February 7, 1960, in the Kentucky State Penitentiary at Eddyville. Complications from untreated diabetes led to kidney failure. He was 47 years old and had served less than 4 years of his sentence. Prison medical records showed he'd refused insulin treatment for months, citing religious objections. By the time intervention became mandatory, the damage was irreversible. No family claimed his body. He was buried in the prison cemetery under a marker that listed only his name and dates. None of the victims' families attended. Most didn't learn of his death until weeks later when a reporter from the Courier journal called seeking their reactions. Ruth Ann Lidford, reached by phone in Lexington, said only, "I hope he made his peace." Then she hung up. The anonymous letter that had triggered the investigation was never explained. Sheriff Kelch received dozens of inquiries from journalists and law enforcement officials asking about the writer's identity. He had no answers. The letter had been postmarked from Lexington, typed on common paper with no distinguishing characteristics. Handwriting experts examined it but found nothing useful. The writer knew specific details, names, approximate ages, the hidden nature of the basement rooms. Someone had known what was happening at the Haverman farm and had finally chosen to act. Theories emerged over the years. Some believed it was a relative who'd grown suspicious. Others suggested a delivery driver or postal worker who'd noticed irregularities. A few thought it might have been someone from Haverman's church who'd heard something troubling in his conversations. The truth remained hidden, locked away with whoever had finally decided that silence was worse than exposure. The Perry County Sheriff's Office conducted an internal review following Elizabeth Watts's newspaper investigation. The review identified multiple failures in the handling of the missing persons cases but stopped short of recommending disciplinary action. Sheriff Kelch retired in 1958. Deputy Hoskins transferred to the state police. Margaret Codall remained with the department and became the first female sheriff in Perry County history when she was elected in 1966. In 2003, a journalist named Sarah Brennan tracked down Ruth Ann Lidford in Columbus, Ohio. She was living under her married name, working as a hospital administrator. She'd never changed her first name, never tried to hide completely. When Brennan asked why, Ruth Ann's answer was simple: changing my name would mean he'd taken that from me too. The interview focused not on the captivity but on the 47 years that followed. Ruth Ann had earned her GED in 1959, attended nursing school, married in 1968. She'd raised 3 children with a husband who knew her history and loved her anyway. She'd built a life defined not by what had been done to her but by what she'd chosen to do afterward. People want to know about the basement, Ruth Ann told Brennan. They want details about the horror, but that was 4 years of a life that's lasted 70 years. I won't pretend it didn't happen, but I also won't let it be the only thing that defines me. She declined to discuss the son she'd given up for adoption, saying only that she hoped he'd found a good family and a peaceful life. She'd never searched for him, believing that reopening that door would cause more pain than healing. When Brennan asked if she'd ever learned who sent the anonymous letter that led to her rescue, Ruth Ann smiled slightly. "No," she said. "But whoever it was, they gave us back our lives. That's enough." The story of the missing Kentucky girls faded from public attention as years passed, becoming a cautionary tale about system-wide failures and the victims nobody looked for. But for those who lived through it, the questions never fully disappeared. They lingered in quiet moments, in the faces of strangers who might be the children given up for adoption, in the knowledge that some truths remain buried even after the graves are opened. If this story matters to you, if you believe these cases deserve to be remembered and learned from, click the like button and subscribe. Share this video so others can understand what happens when society decides certain victims aren't worth finding. These girls deserve better. The next ones do too.